Hello, classmates and Dr. Powell. This is Nicole Dalton, and this is my Week 4 Multimedia Discussion Board. In this discussion board, I'll be covering 3 different themes: the natural systems perspective, structural functional theory, and the open systems perspective. A little housekeeping before I get into my first theme. I included all of my references to my academic journals at the bottom of the slide, so it's easy to refer to when I'm going through each theme. So the first theme is the natural systems perspective, and I went in the direction of employee motivation. And there's 2 things that motivate an employee. It's both internal and external. Internal motivation is the job itself actually motivates the individual. And the second is external motivation, and that's the environment of the organization that will motivate somebody. And building trust is extremely important to increase organizational success and create effectiveness and efficiency within the organization. So somebody who came up, a classical theorist who discussed this, is Chester Barnard, and how the informal organization's culture, or water cooler talk, for example, and how these informal organizations can affect the formal organization. So if people at the water cooler are upset with how something's being run, it's eventually going to seep into the formal organization and their success. And so this relates to my task force because although most informal formal organizations would just be the city of Rancho Cucamonga, for example, that will lead into my task force because it takes so many years to complete this project. So within the task force, there's going to be informal organizations that develop over time. And if the managers or the leaders within the task force aren't aware of this trend, then it could lead to something detrimental and have a negative effect on their productivity and how projects are completed in the future. The second theme is structural functional theory, and I decided to look at bureaucratic dysfunctions. And Merton really led the way in pointing out the dysfunctions that were appearing within Weber's bureaucratic system. For example, it caused trained incapacity, and this is where employees are so dedicated to the organization's rules and policies that when they're presented with a unique challenge, they don't really have the tools or resources to adjust to their environment appropriately. And I found a journal article that looked at the bureaucratic dysfunctions, but within managers specifically. And it showed that the bureaucratic dysfunctions can reduce their managers' commitment to the organization and their overall job satisfaction as managers. And this relates to my task force because there are going to be a lot of hurdles and problems that arise for one reason or another. And if these dysfunctions begin to appear within my task force, especially at the managerial level, it's going to be detrimental to the overall success of the project. For example, mistakes could begin happening, or they could fall off their current timeline just because they don't know how to adjust to their environment when challenges are presented to them. The last theme that I'll be covering is the open systems perspective. And an article that blatantly discusses open systems theory is Katz and Kahn's article within the Classics book, but I've always resonated with Waldo's The Administrative State, and he argued that you should be socially aware of your economic, political, and social environments and how that's going to influence the future of your administration. And he also believed in no long-term planning because these outside influences are going to affect how your organization is run. And this leads into the article that I found for this theme, and it looks at local municipalities implementing open data platforms. Local cities having open data platforms is becoming increasingly more important in today's society and political climate, and rightfully so, because government agencies being transparent with their constituents is going to lead to more trusting of their followers in the organization. And this journal dives into, yes, that having open data systems is important, but implementing these kinds of programs at the city level is really hard because it's time consuming, and a lot of these local agencies don't have the administrative capacity to do something like that. And This came into play with my task force because there are so many stakeholders and taxpayer dollars involved in the success of this project that those stakeholders are going to want to know how the money is spent and where they're at in the project. And leaders within the task force are going to need to be aware of the surrounding political element and environment in order to be successful. And that's going to be practicing that open systems perspective. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a great week.